The streets of Tehran on August 19, 1953, were a maelstrom of noise and fury. Dust hung heavy in the air, thick with the smell of exhaust and fear. Pro-Shah demonstrators, their faces contorted in shouts, clashed violently with supporters of Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh. Shouts turned into screams, and the sounds of fists hitting flesh, then eventually the sharp crack of gunfire, echoed between the buildings. Tanks, their heavy treads grinding against the pavement, lumbered through the city, adding to the terrifying symphony of chaos. It was a day etched into Iran's memory, a turning point many would never forget, even if they never fully understood its hidden strings. In the midst of this turmoil, a cold, calculated operation was unfolding. Operation Ajax, a name that would later become synonymous with foreign intervention, was fully unleashed. From a secure location, discreetly tucked away from the street battles, a man named Kermit Roosevelt Jr., a grandson of a former American president and a key CIA agent, made a radio transmission. His voice was calm, almost detached, as he confirmed the coup's success. It was a moment of chilling efficiency, a testament to the meticulous planning behind the chaos. This wasn't just a spontaneous uprising. It was a carefully engineered overthrow, a stark revelation of the true nature of foreign involvement in Iran's destiny. The narration of these events, far from being a tale of panicked reactions, reveals the almost clinical precision with which the operation was executed. Every step, every move was designed to achieve a specific outcome, regardless of the long-term, devastating consequences for Iran's sovereignty and its future as an independent nation. The immediate goal was clear: the overthrow of Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh. And in that moment, it was achieved. The full impact on Iran's nascent democracy and its people, however, remained a tragic, unfolding story, one that would only become clear with the passage of time. The immediate victory felt hollow, a triumph bought at an invisible price. The oil now flowed freely, but at what cost to a nation's soul? The echoes of that day would reverberate for decades, shaping a destiny few could have foreseen. The decisions made in those turbulent hours would lay the groundwork for future conflicts, for resentment that simmered beneath the surface, eventually boiling over in ways no one could have predicted. It was a silent wound inflicted on a nation whose pain would manifest in unexpected forms years later. Before we continue this journey through history, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Your engagement helps us bring more untold stories to light. To understand the profound impact of that August day, we need to rewind a bit to post-World War II Iran. This was a nation brimming with potential, its land rich with oil, yet it consistently found itself grappling with the heavy hand of foreign influence. Imagine bustling Tehran bazaars, alive with the chatter of merchants and the vibrant colors of spices and carpets. Picture the intricate dance of traditional family structures, where respect for elders and community bonds held deep meaning. Beneath this rich cultural tapestry, a powerful sense of national pride was steadily growing. Iranians, having endured decades of foreign meddling, were increasingly eager to claim their rightful place on the world stage, free from external control. They wanted to determine their own future, manage their own resources, and forge an identity that was truly their own. Into this vibrant, yet yearning, landscape stepped Mohammad Mosaddegh. He was a figure who quickly captured the nation's imagination. Mosaddegh was a charismatic leader, but his appeal wasn't based on flashy speeches or empty promises. Instead, it stemmed from his deep roots in Iranian legal traditions and his unwavering commitment to reclaiming Iran's resources for its own people. He was an aristocrat by birth, educated in Europe, yet he spoke the language of the common Iranian. His popularity wasn't just widespread, it was passionate. People saw in him a champion, someone who dared to stand up against the powerful forces that had long exploited their country. His message was simple, yet revolutionary for its time. Iran's oil belonged to Iran. At the heart of this struggle for national sovereignty lay the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, or AIOC. This British-owned entity was a behemoth, a state within a state, exerting vast control over Iran's most valuable asset. The scale of its operation was staggering, dominating the Iranian economy and political landscape. For decades, the terms of the AIOC's concession were seen by many Iranians as deeply unjust. They felt exploited, watching immense wealth flow out of their country into British coffers, with only a fraction returning to Iran. The company's influence extended beyond just economics. It touched every facet of Iranian life, often dictating policy and stifling any attempts at genuine self-determination. The perceived injustice of the AIOC's presence fueled a simmering resentment that was about to boil over. Even before Mossadegh's rise, subtle signs of friction were evident. Iranian nationalist aspirations were increasingly clashing with entrenched British imperial interests. Small protests, newspaper editorials, and hushed conversations in tea houses all pointed to a growing impatience with the status quo. The idea of oil nationalization, once considered a radical fringe notion, was gaining traction. It moved from the whispers of intellectuals to the roar of the streets. People from all walks of life, from students to laborers, began to rally around the cause. They saw oil nationalization not just as an economic policy, but as a symbol of their dignity and independence. This growing public support for reclaiming their oil was not just a political movement, it was a powerful expression of a nation finding its voice, setting the stage for the dramatic confrontation that would soon engulf Iran and draw the world's attention. The simmering resentment finally boiled over, cracking the edifice of foreign control that had long shadowed Iran. The nationalization of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company wasn't just a political act. It was a declaration of independence, a direct challenge to the powerful nations that had grown rich on Iran's resources. In 1951, Mohammad Mosaddegh, fueled by immense popular support, made the audacious move. He nationalized the AIOC, transforming it into the National Iranian Oil Company, a symbol of Iranian self-determination. This bold step, however, came with a heavy price. Britain, humiliated and enraged by the loss of its most lucrative overseas asset, retaliated swiftly and fiercely. They orchestrated a global boycott of Iranian oil, effectively cutting off Iran's primary source of income. British warships patrolled the Persian Gulf, blocking any tankers attempting to load Iranian crude, enforcing the embargo with a show of military might. Economically, Britain froze Iran's assets in international banks, further strangling the nation's finances. The aim was clear: to bring Iran to its knees, to force Mossadegh to reverse his decision, and to reassert British dominance. This pressure created severe economic hardship for Iran. Industries faltered, unemployment rose, and the dream of national prosperity, born from the oil nationalization, seemed to recede under the weight of international isolation. Initially, the United States watched from a distance, somewhat reluctant to get deeply involved. American policymakers saw the Anglo-Iranian dispute as primarily a British colonial problem. President Truman's administration even tried to mediate, urging both sides to find a compromise. However, as the Cold War intensified and the specter of communism loomed larger, the American stance began to shift. The prolonged crisis in Iran, and coupled with economic instability, started to be viewed through the lens of Soviet expansion. The fear was that if Mossadegh's government collapsed under British pressure, it might create a vacuum that the Soviet Union could exploit, potentially turning Iran into a communist satellite state. This growing anxiety about communism in Iran gradually pushed the US from a position of neutrality to one of active concern and eventually intervention. Throughout this period, diplomatic efforts and negotiations were a constant yet ultimately fruitless endeavor. Mosaddegh, firm in his conviction that Iran had a sovereign right to its own resources, repeatedly rejected proposals that he felt undermined national control. Western powers, on the other hand, particularly Britain, were unwilling to accept Iran's full and unconditional control over its oil. They demanded compensation terms that Mosaddegh viewed as exploitative, and they insisted on maintaining a significant role in the management and distribution of Iranian oil. Each failed negotiation chipped away at the fragile trust between Mossadegh's government and the Western nations. What began as a dispute over oil revenues transformed into a deeper ideological clash. National sovereignty versus international economic interests. The repeated failures left Mosaddegh and many Iranians feeling betrayed, convinced that the West would never truly respect their independence. This gradual erosion of trust was a critical factor in paving the way for the coup. The British, desperate to regain their oil concessions, saw Mosaddegh as an intractable obstacle. The Americans, increasingly concerned about the Cold War implications, began to view him as a liability, someone whose stubborn nationalism could inadvertently open the door to Soviet influence. The confrontation escalated from economic pressure to political maneuvering, and eventually to covert action. The coup, when it finally arrived, was not a sudden, isolated event. It was the culmination of years of escalating confrontation, broken promises, and a deepening chasm of mistrust between Mossadegh's nationalist government and the powerful Western nations, determined to control Iran's destiny and its vast oil reserves. The stage was set for a dramatic and violent climax. The pressure on Iran intensified, leading to a period of intense internal strife within Mossadegh's government. As the economic squeeze tightened and international isolation grew, Mosaddegh, in an effort to maintain control and push through his reforms, began to centralize power. He dissolved parliament, arguing that it was obstructing his nationalist agenda, and held referendums to solidify his authority. While these actions were intended to streamline governance and counter opposition, they also alienated some of his key allies and segments of the population who viewed them as increasingly authoritarian. The democratic institutions he had once championed seemed to be eroding under the weight of the crisis, creating cracks in his broad base of support. This internal fracturing made his government more vulnerable, even as he fought fiercely against foreign intervention. Behind the scenes, the clandestine activities of the CIA and MI6, codenamed Operation Ajax, were moving into high gear. This was no longer just about diplomatic pressure or economic sanctions. It was about actively undermining a sitting government. The operation involved a multi-pronged approach designed to destabilize Mossadegh's rule. CIA agents, led by Kermit Roosevelt Jr., funneled money to anti-Mossaddegh groups, orchestrating street demonstrations that appeared organic but were, in fact, carefully planned. They bribed military officers, promising them promotions and power in a post-Mossaddegh Iran, slowly turning key elements of the armed forces against their own prime minister. Religious figures were also targeted, with agents spreading rumors and misinformation to turn influential clerics and their followers against Mosaddegh, portraying him as anti-religious or a puppet of communist forces. A critical component of Operation Ajax was the manipulation of public opinion. Through a network of sympathetic journalists and media outlets, a relentless propaganda campaign was launched. Newspapers published articles portraying Mosaddegh as a dangerous radical, a communist sympathizer who was steering Iran towards Soviet domination, and a threat to national stability. These rumors and fabricated stories were designed to fuel public unrest, sow seeds of doubt among his supporters, and create an atmosphere of fear and distrust. The goal was to make it seem as though Mosaddegh had lost the confidence of his people and that his removal would be a popular move rather than a foreign orchestrated coup. This psychological warfare was highly effective in a country already reeling from economic hardship and political uncertainty. Amidst this rising tide of covert operations and propaganda, the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, found himself in a precarious position. He was the constitutional monarch, but Mosaddegh held the real power. The Shah initially hesitated to sign the decree dismissing Mosaddegh, fully aware of the public support the Prime Minister still commanded. He wavered, torn between his constitutional duties and the immense pressure from the Western powers and his own military factions. When he finally did sign the decree, it was done in secret, and its failure to immediately unseat Mosaddegh led to a chaotic few days. The Shah, fearing for his safety and the future of his throne, fled Iran, leaving a power vacuum and further plunging the country into uncertainty and chaos. Tehran, during those sweltering August days, was an atmosphere thick with paranoia. Rumors spread like wildfire through the bazaars and coffee houses. People whispered about communists, royalists, and foreign agents. The air was heavy with uncertainty, and palpable tension hung over every street corner. Competing ideologies clashed openly, sometimes violently, as pro-Mosaddegh and anti-Mosaddegh forces demonstrated. The oppressive heat of August, combined with the dust-filled streets, seemed to amplify the psychological weight on the city. It felt as if Tehran itself was holding its breath, a battleground where hidden agendas and the fate of a nation were being decided not in parliament, but in the shadows and on the streets. The tension in Tehran reached a boiling point on August 15, 1953. This was supposed to be the day Mosaddegh was removed, the culmination of all the planning and propaganda, but the first attempt to oust him went spectacularly wrong. The Shah had signed the dismissal decree in secret, a document that was meant to be delivered to Mosaddegh, effectively ending his premiership. However, the plan leaked. Instead of Mosaddegh being caught off guard, it was the coup plotters who were surprised. Pro-Shah officers who had been tasked with delivering the decree and securing key positions were arrested. Mosaddegh, for a brief moment, seemed to have triumphed. He appeared stronger than ever, and his supporters celebrated in the streets, believing they had thwarted a royalist plot. The Shah, in a panic, fled Iran, leaving the country in even greater disarray. This initial failure could have easily ended Operation Ajax. Many would have cut their losses and retreated, but Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the CIA's man on the ground, was not one to give up so easily. He made an audacious decision, one that would redefine the course of Iranian history. Despite the setbacks and the Shah's flight, Roosevelt decided to double down. He believed the operation could still succeed. He poured more resources into the effort, activating every asset, every paid demonstrator, and every bribed military officer. He understood that the momentum, though temporarily lost, could be recaptured with a more forceful, more visible push. This was no longer a covert operation in the shadows. It was about to explode onto the streets of Tehran. What followed was a masterclass in orchestrated chaos. On August 19th, Tehran erupted. It wasn't a spontaneous uprising, it was a carefully choreographed explosion of pro-Shah sentiment. CIA funds flowed freely, mobilizing large crowds who marched through the city, shouting slogans in support of the Shah and against Mosaddegh. These weren't just ordinary citizens. They were often paid agitators, thugs, and opportunists, mixed with genuine royalists. Simultaneously, key military units, whose commanders had been bought or convinced, moved into position. Tanks rolled through the streets, not just as a symbol of power, but as an active force, ready to engage anyone who stood in their way. The capital became a battleground, a violent spectacle designed to create an illusion of widespread popular demand for Mossadegh's removal. The ultimate target was Mossadegh's residence. the symbol of his power and his defiance. Pro-Shah forces, backed by military units, converged on his home. The confrontation was brutal. Tanks fired directly at the building, tearing through its walls. Intense street fighting broke out, with Mossadegh's remaining loyalists and supporters attempting to defend him against the overwhelming force of the coup plotters. The sounds of gunfire and explosions echoed through the city, a terrifying soundtrack to the collapse of a democratic experiment. The battle for Mossadegh's home was short but fierce, a desperate last stand against a tide that had been meticulously engineered to sweep him away. The inevitable happened. Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh, the man who had dared to stand up to foreign powers and reclaim his nation's oil, was apprehended. He was found not in a grand escape, but in the chaos of his besieged home. His capture marked the definitive end of his premiership and a profound, irreversible shift in Iran's political landscape. The democratic aspirations that had blossomed under his leadership were crushed under the weight of foreign intervention. As the dust settled and the Shah's supporters celebrated in the streets, a chilling truth began to unveil itself. The chaos, the protests, the military action. It wasn't an organic uprising of the Iranian people against a tyrannical leader. It was a meticulously planned, foreign-engineered intervention, a betrayal of Iran's nascent democracy executed with cold precision by the CIA and MI6. The illusion of a popular revolution was just that, an illusion carefully constructed to mask the true architects of this seismic change. The realization that their nation's destiny had been manipulated from abroad left a deep wound, a scar that would fester for decades to come, shaping Iran's future in ways few could have foreseen on that fateful day. With Mossadegh's capture, the path was cleared for the Shah's triumphant return. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who had fled in disgrace just days before, now flew back to Tehran, hailed by orchestrated crowds as a national savior. His rule, however, was fundamentally altered. Gone was the hesitant monarch, replaced by an increasingly autocratic leader, acutely aware that his throne had been restored and was now maintained by foreign powers, primarily the United States. This dependency forged a new, more repressive era for Iran. One of the Shah's immediate actions, heavily influenced by his Western allies, was the establishment of SAVAK, his notorious secret police. This organization became a brutal instrument of control, crushing dissent, silencing opposition, and instilling fear throughout the population. The democratic aspirations that Mossadegh had championed were systematically dismantled, replaced by a regime that prioritized stability and Western interests over the freedoms of its own people. Mossadegh himself faced a calculated, symbolic end. He was put on trial, accused of treason. Though he defended himself with his characteristic eloquence and legal acumen, the outcome was predetermined. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in solitary confinement, followed by permanent house arrest in his ancestral village of Ahmadabad until his death in 1967. For many Iranians, Mossadegh became more than just a deposed prime minister. He transformed into a martyr for Iranian nationalism, a symbol of resistance against foreign domination and a poignant reminder of what could have been. His sacrifice resonated deeply, keeping the flame of national pride and anti-imperialist sentiment alive, albeit underground. The 1953 coup dramatically reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. It solidified American influence in the region, positioning Iran as a staunch ally in the Cold War against the Soviet Union. Western access to Iran's vast oil reserves was secured, ensuring a steady supply for global markets, especially for the UK and US. This short-term strategic victory, however, came at an immense and unforeseen long-term cost. The overthrow of a democratically elected leader by foreign powers bred a deep-seated resentment and profound distrust of the West among the Iranian people. This feeling simmered beneath the surface of the Shah's seemingly stable rule, an open wound that refused to heal. The Iranian public observed the hypocrisy, Western nations championing democracy abroad while actively subverting it when their economic and strategic interests were threatened. This resentment was not just a fleeting emotion, it was a seed that would germinate and grow into a powerful force. The seeds of future unrest were undeniably sown on that August day in 1953. The coup created a fertile ground for anti-Western sentiment, fueling the rise of extremist ideologies and radical change. The brutal suppression of political opposition by the Shah's regime, made possible by Western support, meant that dissent could only find expression through religious or revolutionary channels. This trajectory ultimately culminated in the Iranian Revolution of 1979, a seismic event that not only toppled the Shah, but fundamentally altered the relationship between Iran and the West, creating a lasting legacy of animosity and misunderstanding. Looking back, the coup represents a tragic irony. The immediate goal of securing oil and containing communism was achieved, but at the expense of genuine democracy and the long-term stability of an entire nation. The psychological scars on Iran were deep, a collective memory of betrayal that continues to influence its foreign policy and national identity. The loss of democratic aspirations, the suppression of free expression, and the installation of an authoritarian regime by external forces left an indelible mark. It serves as a stark reminder of the complex interplay of power, intervention, and the enduring price of sovereignty. The sands of time may shift, but the ghost of 1953 still whispers through the annals of Iranian history, a haunting echo of a moment when a nation's destiny was violently diverted, leaving a legacy that continues to shape the world today.